Today, I'd like to share with you the blood-soaked story of Nicholas Dukes and Adam Nutt. In the 1880s, these two men found themselves swept up in an uncontrollable maelstrom of honor, vengeance, and insanity. Nicholas Dukes was a promising young lawyer in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, about 60 miles south of Pittsburgh. Adam Nutt was a local Civil War hero, known universally as Captain Nutt, and he enjoyed a prominent position in the Pennsylvania State Treasury. Their story begins in 1881, when Dukes spotted Nutt's eldest daughter, Lizzie, across the aisle in church. Her generous spirit was rivaled only by her stunning beauty. Soon, Dukes would win not only election to the State House, but Lizzie's affections as well. Such was her charm, Dukes later recalled, she could, quote, disarm the devil himself. That Lizzie would come to see Dukes as a personification of evil made her description perversely apropos. When Dukes asked for Lizzie's hand in marriage, she eagerly accepted. Yet Dukes soon soured on Lizzie for reasons that remain obscure. With the nuptials impending, the rising politician sent Captain Nutt a scandalous letter that would result in the death of both men. Dukes accused his betrothed of premarital sexual impropriety with himself. According to Dukes, I called upon her, consonant to her cordial invitation, and she received me in the dining room. I made a feint as if to kiss her. I was utterly surprised when, instead of withdrawing her face from me, she absolutely advanced her face to meet me. Of course, such a reception flattered my vanity, and I began to feel an interest in her. According to Dukes, in a subsequent letter, things got a little more heated between him and Lizzie. Quote, she came up and placed herself on my lap, as usual, and after fondling her for some time, I made a solicitation. To my infinite astonishment and grief, she melted down like wax. Oh, how I pitied her weakness. But where is there a man that can resist the temptation of such beauty and loveliness? You would have done as I did, but what was my horror and heartsickness when I found the signs of her virginity wanting. This was hardly the worst of it. Dukes goes on to accuse Lizzie of having had some kind of physical relationship with 8 other men and informs Captain Nutt that she is pregnant by one of them and implies that Lizzie should get an abortion. In the context of 19th century sexual propriety, this letter was nothing short of astounding. He called me old-fashioned, but I think it's sort of astounding today. Captain Nutt was not the sort of man who easily suffered an affront to his family's honor. You mistake the temper of the man with whom you must deal, Nutt replied to Dukes. You write to me as if you considered me a shameless coward. I shall convince you that I have the physical courage to espouse my daughter's cause and defend the honor of myself and family. I have always held that when a man invades the sanctity of a home, he takes his life in his hands, and under this code, I shall act. This commonwealth is not big enough for the both of us. Dukes replied in kind, you appoint yourself a murderer and assassin with all the deliberation of a savage or a thug. Your letter would clear me should I take your life upon sight. You want her reputation veneered at my sole expense. You want to blight my life forever for a cheap little cloak. No, sir, my honor is as dear to me as yours is to you, and I prefer to die than to live a life of such shame. On Christmas Eve, 1882, Captain Nutt confronted Nicholas Dukes in the latter's hotel room, and the two came to blows. According to later testimony, Lizzie's cousin and two hotel employees burst into the room and frantically tried to intervene. Dukes, however, steadied his revolver and fired a single shot through the skull of his would-be father-in-law. The captain, slumping to the ground, reached for his pistol, but was unable to fire. He died with his hand in a death grip on his weapon. This was not the last time that Nicholas Dukes would encounter that particular firearm. Calmly, Dukes put on his overcoat, walked a short distance to the local jail, and turned himself into the sheriff. Nicholas Dukes stood trial the following March. The proceedings attracted a massive horde of onlookers, and the American press readily fed the public's appetite for lurid details. Of the 60 men called for jury duty, 57 answered to their names, and of these 12 were selected to determine Dukes' fate. The jurors ranged in age from 27 to 58 and featured no fewer than 3 farmers, 2 blacksmiths, and a wagon maker. In 5 days' time, one juror would have to seek shelter in a cave for the verdict he would render. Another would lose his job. A third would lose his very life. All of the jurors were married, and these men shared one other trait in common. Like Dukes, they were all Democrats. Prosecutors for the Commonwealth depicted Dukes as a murderous libertine who ruined Lizzie and then had the audacity to take the life of her beloved father. Every witness to the killing, except for Dukes, testified that the captain reached for his weapon only after Dukes had fired. The defense, however, insisted that its client had acted in lawful self-defense. According to Dukes, Nutt had, quote, thrust his right hand into his overcoat pocket and attempted to draw his pistol. It seemed to be entangled. I shall never forget the murderous look in his eyes. The awful moment had come. It was he or I. On March 14th, 1883, shortly before 8 in the evening, Judge Wilson emerged from his home and headed toward the courtroom, prompting rumors that the jury had reached its verdict. Indeed, it had. With the eyes of the nation fixed upon them, 12 Pennsylvania jurors acquitted Nicholas Dukes of the charge of murder. At first, paralyzed with shock, the mass inside the courthouse soon poured onto the street and grew rowdy. Protesters hung effigies of Dukes from telegram poles and dragged a dummy dressed as Dukes through the streets. Despite a snowstorm the following evening, leading citizens of Uniontown organized a so-called indignation meeting to voice their opposition to the ostensibly fixed jury. Clergy, doctors, newspaper editors, and merchants came together and signed a resolution that read, "We demand exemption from the partisan efforts of public officers to tamper with the behests of justice, and offer as the only alternative the bloody arena at the shrine of Judge Lynch." Judge Lynch being a contemporary term of art referring to extra-legal justice. The mob resolved to do what the legal system would not. But the defendant had already fled Uniontown and plotted his next move, a journey to Harrisburg for his inauguration at the State House. The Pennsylvania House of Representatives faced a difficult question. Should it allow a duly elected member to take his oath of office amid an unprecedented public uproar? A fascinating debate ensued. Some representatives argued that the legislature had every right to bar Dukes from its chamber. But others feared that preventing a man convicted of no crime from serving in office would set a dangerous precedent susceptible to future abuse. As one delegate from Lackawanna asked, should unwarranted or arbitrary action be taken now, how easy it might be in the future for one party to expel a member of the other side upon imaginary grounds, or an alleged state of facts, and probably thereby make itself the dominant party. Before the House could make this vital decision, the Speaker read aloud a startling telegram. Representative-elect Dukes would willingly vacate his seat. You see, when Dukes had traveled by train to Harrisburg, he received word that an angry mob awaited him in the state capitol, and so he stayed on board, continuing eastward to Philadelphia. The once aspiring politician ultimately decided to return to Uniontown and resume his law practice, although Dukes continued to live in fear for his life, and with good reason. On June 13th, Lizzie's 20-year-old brother, James, waited for his father's assassin in the shadows of an abandoned storefront. Dukes eventually passed by young Nutt, who drew the captain's pistol and began to fire. Evading 2 bullets, Dukes turned a corner and raced up the steps to the post office for cover. James followed in hot pursuit, took aim, and lodged a bullet in Dukes' heart. It was there, on the floor of the very post office where Dukes had mailed the infamous letter to the captain, it was there that Nicholas Dukes drew his final breath. When the local physician, Dr. Sturgeon, was summoned to inspect Dukes' body, he uncovered on the corpse the very gun that Dukes had trained on James's father the previous Christmas Eve. Dukes' lifeless arms were folded across his body. He was covered with a blanket and carried to his hotel room, where Captain Nutt's body had lay just 6 months prior. The townspeople ran to the palatial Nutt estate, crying, "Jim has killed Dukes." James became a national hero overnight, a symbol of justice that the law had failed to provide. With James awaiting trial in a jail cell, the Nutts were deluged with offers to fund his legal defense. These offers, however, proved unnecessary. The gifted orator and sitting U.S. Senator Daniel Voorhees would defend James pro bono. Strangers would visit the jailhouse to shake hands with the man who dared defend his sister's honor and father's memory. When the state decided to hold the trial in Pittsburgh, throngs of people lined the railway to catch a glimpse at the defendant. At one stop, 3 young women boarded the train to present the accused with a bouquet of flowers. In a courtroom that one reporter described as packed to suffocation, the murder trial of James Nutt commenced on January 15th, 1884. The nation once again turned its attention to the latest chapter of this phenomenal saga. Curiously, the defense characterized James as both a defender of honor and a victim of temporary insanity. In an impassioned closing argument, Senator Voorhees moved much of the courthouse to tears. "The compensation that Jimmy Nutt has," the senator told the jury, "is his deep, abiding, and everlasting love. The love of his father dead, the love of his mother in her sorrow, the love of his sister in her distress." All expected the jury to deliberate for only a few minutes before promptly returning a verdict of not guilty. Yet hope soon gave way to trepidation as the jurors failed to reappear that evening. Finally, the next morning, the court reconvened to announce the future of James's life and liberty. Weakened from months of malnourishment in prison, James was unable to stand on his own, and a bailiff propped him up as the foreman read the verdict: not guilty. Amid a massive celebration, some contemporaries acknowledged that James's insanity plea had been a farce designed to secure his acquittal. But James's insanity would prove itself neither fictional nor temporary. After walking free, the hero of Uniontown would try to kill several more people unprovoked. I believe there are many lessons we can draw from this history, But let me leave you today with just one. The tragic story of Nicholas Dukes and the Nutt family teaches us in vivid and violent terms the dangers of protecting vigilante justice from the reach of the law. Thank you.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.